Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and I've played Elden Ring on the PlayStation 4 Pro. So I'll be talking about it in this video. First up, well, I thought about it a lot and I asked some of you guys what you thought, and I came to the conclusion that, for my channel, I'm not going to show much gameplay before the game launches. And for this particular video, I'm only going to show menus, stats, some environmental shots, and a few very brief clips of combat to highlight something I'm trying to explain. Because, primarily, exploration plays a huge role in these games. With Elden Ring, that's even more the case than normal, and showing, well, almost anything from my experience would feel like I'm spoiling something and ruining your experience. Of course, if you're after gameplay, there's going to be a lot coming up now and over the next few days and weeks that you'll be able to look at if you want to. Bandai Namco themselves put out a pretty great video a few days ago that'll let you see a good taste of the game. So perhaps it's not the smartest decision from my perspective when it comes to, getting loads of views, but I hope you understand why I'm doing this. Of course, I think it's best to go in blind and not really seeing much, but if you want to go and look at videos, of course that's your decision. You do what feels good for you, right? But on that note, I'm going to talk about the game in this video, but I'll do my best not to spoil anything to do with, bosses or enemies or things like that. But where to begin? Well, Elden Ring, much like Dark Souls, begins with you creating your character. You have 10 classes to choose between. These classes are starting points, but they don't lock you into anything, same as you would expect from this sort of game. You could start as a magic user and still end up using greatswords and heavy armor. There'll be a network test coming shortly after this video is released, and you might get the chance to play the game for yourself. In this test, there is no character creation. Instead, you will be choosing a pre-made template of a character for the purposes of testing. FromSoft do this with most of their games. Dark Souls 1, for example, when you played the demo for that, you could play Solaire or a Black Knight. That didn't mean Solaire and Black Knight were starting classes. Same thing for Elden Ring here. So while some of these may show up in the final game as very similar classes or something like that, don't be surprised if some of the presets here don't end up as starting classes. And in general, remember that this is a work in progress, so things might change in the final game, etc, etc. Once you've made your character, you'll be thrown into the starting area. You can leave this almost immediately if you so choose and start the proper game. Or you can go through a short tutorial cave area, which will introduce you to a few of the basic controls and mechanics. Do you remember things betwixt in Dark Souls 2? It functions almost identically to that. You can skip it, or just take your time and explore the short area and come to grips with controls and all that. Either way, once you're done, you'll have your reveal of the world. And here's the first major difference, of course, between Elden Ring and, say, Dark Souls. The world is larger, it is more open, and you can jump. To guide you on your way, there will be faint golden traces that are, in a way, giving you a suggested path. So, remember when people would start up Dark Souls and they would get to Firelink Shrine and they would go, I don't know where to go. Where am I supposed to go? Do I go up? Do I go down? Do I go sideways? Well, now there are some little twinkly lights you can follow if you want to. You don't have to though. Because if you're like me, you're going to do a 180 and start exploring every other direction. As you do so, you will find ancient ruins, materials to harvest for crafting, more on that soon, enemies, and all sorts of treasure and surprises. So let's talk briefly about this open world, shall we? Now, this isn't the sort of open world where you can say, go in any direction you see fit and go right to the end of the game. It's not like, say, Just Cause, where you start in the middle of the map and then you can go anywhere. It's a little more structured. We know there are 6 kingdoms in the game. For example, you may need to work yourself through a castle at the end of the first kingdom before you reach the second. So you can't just run straight to the end of the game from the very beginning, properly. So how big is this open world? Well, if there's 6 kingdoms, and I think I've seen most of the first kingdom, maybe 80% of it, I'm feeling like. That took me 8 hours to explore at my own pace. I think I got most things, but I'm sure I missed, more than a few secrets. And I'm sure there were some hidden walls that I completely missed because I didn't find a single hidden wall in 8 hours, which I guess I suck at finding them. But again, this isn't going to be an open world the size of Just Cause, where it's hundreds and thousands of miles, but at least from what I've explored so far, it's very densely packed with things to see and do, and it's going to be a good size. There are cave systems. You will find, for example, a little ruined structure full of enemies. Clear it out and then you might also find a staircase leading underground, and who knows what you'll find down there. Treasure, a boss, an NPC, a whole new area? Well, you'll see. I don't want to explain anything, ultra specific that I found, but I'll tell you that I'm quite picky with open world games. I enjoy them, but I think they have to be done right. So far, I have enjoyed Elden Ring's open world quite a lot. How about the feel of the world? When, we talk about tone and atmosphere, things like that. Weirdly enough, the biggest comparison I kept coming back to was Shadow of the Colossus. If you've played other Souls games, you'll know that music is barely used throughout, largely just for boss fights and cutscenes and some areas like the hub. Elden Ring uses ambient music throughout the world, which never becomes a distraction, only in the sense that you might be thinking, oh, there's music and I'm just walking around. That's distracting because it's not really ever been like that in Dark Souls games. And something about the feel of walking, jumping and riding throughout this world made me think Shadow of the Colossus. Speaking of which, just like that game, there's wildlife. Seeing wildlife in a Souls kind of game is interesting. It helps the world feel alive, but make no mistake, whilst this isn't Dark Souls, things are still in a pretty bad shape. Whilst the lands between are a little more colourful than the other Souls games, maybe a little more like Shadows Die Twice in that you will see some things that just look nice. I mean, the lands between are beautiful, yes, but it's a haunted, ruined sort of beauty for the most part. Castles towering on the horizon, built on cliffs that look as if they'll crumble away at any moment. And looming above it all, visible from almost any part of the map, the Erd Tree. It is very easy to navigate the world even without a mini-map, because of all the unique structures and landmarks, which I absolutely love. That said, there is a compass to aid you in getting your bearing, and there's a world map you can bring up at any time. On this map, you can set a beacon or a waymark, which will visibly show up in the world as a beam of light, which is really cool. You might also find telescopes out in the world, and they don't work exactly how you might imagine, but keep an eye out for them as they are extremely useful. Now, another thing, it's an open world, so how is the performance? As mentioned earlier, I was playing on the PS4 Pro. Keep in mind, I don't have the means to measure frame rate, but it felt like the game ran at 30 FPS, sometimes rising higher to the 40s, maybe even 50s, if I was looking up at the sky or a wall. But in general gameplay, it felt like 30. I didn't really notice any times the frame rate got obliterated and went down to, say, Blighttown levels, so if there were dips, they were minor for me. Either way, performance didn't seem to be an issue on PS4 Pro. When the full game is out, I will certainly be playing it on PC. Load times were a little long on PS4 Pro, but no longer than they were in Dark Souls 3. I'm just at this point used to SSDs and stuff, so it's perfectly fine. But what you really want to know is gameplay, right? Well, okay, let's get right into it. First up, poise is gone, as in there is no visible poise stat in the game. If poise exists, it is invisible and done behind the scenes, in the same way they don't tell you how many iframes you have or whatever. But on that note, let's look at the other stats, shall we? Vigor, mind, endurance, strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith, and arcane. The main takeaway here, equip load is determined by strength now, which frankly makes sense to me because strength builds are the ones who would generally be using heavier things in the first place. On top of that, we have variations of sorceries and miracles returning, in the form of glintstone sorceries, replacing soul sorceries, and incantations, replacing miracles. Now, I'm again not going to give anything away in terms of what sorts of sorceries and incantations you will find, but for incantations in particular, there is some really cool ones in there that, well, they're not what you would expect from Dark Souls miracles. I know what you're thinking. Where is attunement? How do we get more attunement slots? Because none of these stats affect it. No, whilst mind does increase your FP, your magic bar, it does not give you more attunement slots. How you get more is by finding an item in the world, which I guess you could say is equivalent to something like an Estus flask shard. Something that's fairly rare that you will find infrequently and will increase the number of attunement slots you are allowed. How about resistances? Well, we've got poison, bleeding, and frostbite all coming back in some form or another. Then we also have death, sleep, and madness. If I had to wager a guess, I would say death is similar to being cursed in Dark Souls. When the meter falls up, you will go "Ooh." Sleep, well, I guess you will fall asleep. You can put enemies to sleep as well, which is entertaining. And as for madness, I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work, but, well, we can make some guesses. You can find plenty of materials in the world to craft with, and these will let you make arrows, throwing knives, and so on. You can purchase or find recipe books to expand your list of, well, crafting recipes. I am rarely a fan of crafting in games, but it felt quite non-intrusive here, and it would be nice to be able to craft arrows, bombs, and such on the fly. So, how about combat? The big two changes here, if we're comparing with Dark Souls 3, which I would say this game is most similar to Dark Souls 3 of anything else I can think of. Jumping and guard breaking. Of course, plunging attacks and jumping attacks have been in Dark Souls since the beginning, but now that we can jump on demand, jumping, charge, and strong attacks have replaced plunging attacks, effectively. Guard breaking in the traditional sense of tap forward and attack has been removed. Don't worry though, they've improved that whole system in my opinion. Remember how in Dark Souls 3 some large enemies would collapse into a critical state if you wallop them enough, and how in Shadows Die Twice, enemies have a posture gauge you can break. Imagine a combination of these two things, and that's more or less how Elden Ring works. Enemies have an invisible posture or stance gauge that you can break. Charge attacks, jump attacks, and counter attacks will break it faster than normal attacks. And no, you didn't mishear me, counter attacks. If you block an attack in Elden Ring and then hit strong attack immediately after, you will perform a counter attack, which does heavy posture damage. This allows you to take a counter-based playstyle if you so wish. Of course, if you prefer a more proactive, Bloodborne-style rushdown approach, you can take that too. Naturally, backstabs and parries work more or less the same as Dark Souls 3. One approach to fighting bosses is to block their attacks and then work out when you're able to perform your counterattack safely, in other words at the end of their combo string typically. And this can be a good way to break the boss's posture, letting you land a powerful, critical blow on them. It's a great system and I really enjoy how it feels, but overall, combat isn't too different from Dark Souls 3. There is a crouch button, so you can sneak up on enemies, but don't expect stealth to play a large role in the game by any means. So how about mounted combat? Well, it's not super in-depth, but you can attack to either side whilst on your mount. You can do a charge attack, but if you take too much damage, you'll be knocked off. The horse can die too. You can revive it using one of your healing flasks. So maybe you want to know how the healing works. Well, very similar again to Dark Souls 3, where you had Estus and Ashen Estus. This time you have red flasks for healing and blue flasks for FP or magic. And you can decide how you want to divvy them up and split up the number of charges between them. On top of that, every time you defeat a group of enemies, you can regenerate some of your flasks. This is great and makes exploring a lot more comfortable. It can even be used in certain boss encounters. There's also a new type of flask, along with healing and FP. This is a flask which you mix yourself. In essence, you will find things that combine together to create a flask of your own design. The one I had was pretty basic. It healed me and restored half of my FP. Or I could have made one that would heal me and make my stamina regenerate faster for a period of time. Or I could have made one that explodes when I drink it. Not really sure what the point of that is, but oh well. Maybe for like a hyper mode build where you need to be below a certain health percentage? Moving on, how about bosses? Well, Elden Ring looks like it's going to have a lot of bosses, but it feels like they will be split between greater bosses and, well, mini bosses, or shall we say foes and great foes. In the 8 or so hours that I was exploring, I found 7 or 8 bosses, I think. I might have forgotten one though. See, whilst the multiple phase bosses are still there, you will also fight things better described as mini-bosses that are not very complex or difficult and can be killed faster than the sort of epic bosses, the great bosses. Despite the game being, more open world than other games, you will still find castle-like areas and dungeons ripe for exploring, with the same sort of level design you would hope to see. So you might be wondering about weapon arts. Well, effectively, you can find them in the world and equip them onto weapons. Unique weapons will have unique weapon arts. Think the difference between a longsword and Quelaag's Fury Sword. The latter would have a unique one which can't be changed. The former, the longsword, would let you choose. Weapon arts are also used to change a weapon's properties. Certain weapon arts let you change a weapon from, say, standard to lightning, but you can always keep them standard if you prefer. And weapon arts now I think are called Ashes of War or something like that. You will also find summon items in the world. Find one of these treasures and then you can use FP to summon the entity that will fight alongside you for a time, or until they lose their health. Naturally, there will still be standard NPC and player summons that function as in Dark Souls. Think of these as a new way to spend FP that doesn't involve sorceries or incantations. And you can either find and summon your favourite summon, or you can use one that best fits the situation that you're in, one that supplements your playstyle. If you don't have many ranged options for you, well, maybe you want to find one that's like an archer or a magic user, right? Well, I think that's most of the important bits. However, I am planning on making a follow-up video where I'll specifically answer questions you might have, and that I can reasonably answer. So please do feel free to ask comments down below. Rest assured, even if I don't reply to them, I read every comment and I'm gonna gather them all up and then make a video where I answer all of them that I can in that. In summary, for now though, I'm very excited about Elden Ring after having played it some. If I have any worries, it would be combat-wise, it's a bit too much like Dark Souls 3, wherein fast weapons are always the way to go, and heavy armor never felt very effective, the defense not worth the mobility cost. Of course, that was Dark Souls 3, I can't really say that for sure about Elden Ring yet because I've not played through the whole game. That's something I would be slightly worried about though, going into it, Likewise, I wonder if the game's gonna have any tamper or hacking, anti-cheat protection stuff. Anything to stop people teleporting around and, I don't know, just messing up the experiences of other people with cheating and hacking and all that. That's always been a concern with these games when it comes to the online, whether you're on console or PC. But for the most part, I'm really looking forward to exploring the world, especially in co-op, as of course you can explore the open world together. Until next time though, you guys take care, and remember to ask any questions below. Thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.